It seems an age since I've seen you. Countdown as the weeks trickle into days. I hope that time hasn't changed you. My happiness is slowly creeping back. Now you're at home.
Hello everyone and welcome to the World Science Festival Brisbane 2021. I'm Bernie Hobbs and I'm absolutely rapt to be back here with you this year. I'm really excited about today's event. The moon is mine. It's a bit different from your run-of-the-mill festival event, but we'll get to that in just a moment. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're coming to you from today, the Turrbal and Yagara people. It's so great to be here. It's great that the festival is live. As I said, today's event, The Moon is Mine, is a little bit different. It'll still be lots of fun and it'll still be informative, but it's going to involve a little bit of travel. Time travel. So don't worry, I'll have you back in time for dinner. In just a moment, we're going to leap forward to the year 2030 and check in on what's happening out in space, see what's been going on with the race to commercialise space and space travel. So I hope you're ready to buckle up. But before we jump forward in time, let's meet our fellow travellers on this fantastic voyage. Our first guest right here with us in the studio is Jonathan Fulcher, Dr. Jonathan Fulcher, a partner in the law firm Hopgood Gannon, where he's head of resources and energy practice. But he's not just a lawyer, he's got other human qualifications. Most importantly today, he's a lifelong space nerd, so he's a big space junkie. He's also a leading light on native title and cultural heritage law and an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland. And very importantly, Jonathan cut short his holiday to be with us here today. So that's how much of a nerd he is, and that's how much I want to thank you for coming along today, Jonathan. So it's great to have you here with us. Our second guest, doesn't get much better than this, our second guest is an actual rocket scientist, Dr. Joni Sitzma. So Joni's had years of experience in aviation and the aerospace industry, building rockets, designing all sorts of things around them. And she was a space nerd from when you were a little tacker in Florida. Joni's a passionate innovator, mentor and diversity advocate, and she's currently working here in Brisbane as a program manager at Emerson, where you map mines with drones, which will come in fairly handy for our conversation a little bit later in the future. Our next guest is a man who's looking for life in space. Dr. David Flannery clearly isn't happy with the level of life he's found here on planet Earth, so he's on a mission to see what's out there in the big void. So David loved space so much as a young man that he studied geology, but it's worked out okay for you. David's worked for NASA investigating ancient microbial life forms in rocks here on Earth so that he can help NASA to work out ways to find evidence of life on rocks in space when we eventually get out there good and proper. Right now, though, you're at Queensland University of Technology as an adjunct professor where you can keep exploring your interests in astrobiology and geology. So professional, lifelong nerd is how I'm pegging you today, David. It's great to have you here with us. Any disagreement on that? No, I didn't think so. Now, these days, obviously, no panel is complete without someone zooming in from overseas, preferably with their kids having a huge Barney in the background, maybe a cat filter. I don't know. So our first guest today is dialing in all the way from New York. Richard Garriott. You can tell because it says so right there on his jacket. I'm not sure if that's because you're prone to losing clothes, but there's the evidence. So Richard's one of the granddaddies of the video game industry and an entrepreneur with a lifelong fascination for spaceflight. His dad was a NASA astronaut and Richard's been into space himself as a private astronaut. So that's cost big bickies, so you're pretty cashed up from those days as a video game entrepreneur. Plus, Richard is the proud owner of a lunar rover and a lunar lander, both of which are still on the moon. So thanks for joining us, Richard. And I hope that the one that's on the moon, I hope someone's turning that over every other day because you don't want to get a flat battery up there. It would be, yeah, no, good. Okay, you're all across it. Our final guest today is is Adam Gilmour. Now, Adam has had also, like everyone here today, it feels like it's compulsory, a lifelong passion for space. But you didn't go into space straight away, young Adam. You got distracted by 20 years in the banking industry. Must have been the similarity of staring into the void all that time that just made me feel like you were entering empty space. You and your brother eventually founded the Queensland-based rocket company Gilmour Space, which is now one of Australia's leading space companies. So that's our panel. We are set to go. That's what they're doing for their jobs right now in 2021. But who are they going to become in the future? What will they be doing in 2030? And what's it got to do with the mine? Let's find out. I hope you're ready for it. Panellists, time to buckle up and get your safety gear on. The countdown is on. We are about to travel forward in time to the year 2030. Here we go. Sorry, I'm used to working with cheap ABC special effects, so that's as good as it's going to get. Okay. Here we are in 2030, and look at you. You all look amazing. You have not aged a day. It's all that clean living, I'm sure. So you haven't changed, but a lot of other things have changed around here. First up, Australia has its very own spaceport. Been talking about it for yonks. 2030, it's a reality. So it's a spaceport we can launch rockets from. And we've got a minister for space. Who isn't excited about that? Everyone wants more federal ministers for everything. Wow, we've got a minister for space. And that spaceport is not just for astronauts. Thousands of cashed up holiday makers have been to space on board one of the space tourism trips offered by heaps of different companies. Most of them ultimately owned by Elon Musk, Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos. So not everything has changed, down the track. Adam Gilmour is 2030 and you, as predicted, are a serial space entrepreneur. You're still in the game. You are killing it, in fact. You must be pretty chuffed about us having our spaceport. Why is Australia a good location for launches?
Oh, because from Australia you can get to most of the orbital planes around the Earth, most of the highways in space.
There are highways in space?
They're kind of highways, that's the way I like to describe them. And from many parts of Australia you can go to almost all of the places. Australia's an island that's got a lot of ocean around it, so you're not likely to crash into anybody else along the way to space.
As you crash your vehicle on takeoff. Yeah, sorry, we won't emphasise that bit. So is there anything about being close to the equator too, or does that not make...
There's a lot of people talk about being close to the equator, and if you're going into an inclination that's close to the equator, it's good. You get a bit of a kick from the spin of the Earth the closer you are to the equator. So for many orbits, it's good. But if you're going around the poles, it's actually bad. So you want to be down south.
All right. Okay. So maybe we're looking at getting a couple of spaceports to cover both of those options. And having our own site, does that, I don't know, in a security kind of fashion, our own launching site, does that help us make us feel less vulnerable to world events?
Well, I mean, by now in space, like if you don't have access to space, you're like a second or third tier country. So Australia's had to have access to space to be able to compete with all the rest of the world, developed countries. And so our wonderful government 9 years ago figured this out and then started pouring a whole lot of money into the space industry so that we could compete with everybody else and then set up bases on the moon and beyond that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Now, thanks, Adam. Jonathan Fulcher, here in 2030, you're living the dream of every middle-aged lawyer to retire into government. Yeah. You are now the Federal Minister for Space. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. He seems quite proud of that. Now, one of your first jobs as Minister for Space was choosing the location of the Australian spaceport. There were a few contenders, the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia, Bowen here in your home state, Queensland, and Nhulunbuy in the Northern Territory. Which one did you choose?
Of course, we chose Bowen. Largely due to the things that Adam was talking about, but we actually used as a model the search for a nuclear dump, which has just taken place in the last 3 or 4 years in Australia.
And Bowen was found to be the ideal
No, they
site?
chose 5 different sites for that, all very remote. But the stakeholder issues were significant. And so the Bowen community welcomed the spaceport in a way that Nhulunbuy and the Eyre Peninsula did not.
Well, it's funny because I know that was your initial inclination and, you know, Bowen being within your parliamentary seat certainly had no impact on that decision to inject a huge amount of federal funding there. But as we all know...
about mangoes.
As we all know, pork barrelling went out in the middle of the 2020s. So, in fact, with the new regulations, ministers are now compelled to actually take the advice of their departments on decisions. So as much as you were pro Bowen getting it, you did, listen to your department and you went with the decision to go to Nhulunbuy. Oh. And, I know that you were thinking that they wouldn't be that excited about it, but they were totally into it. And incredibly, I think you're being way too modest here, incredibly, you managed to negotiate a commercial agreement on traditional land where the owners were not just happy about the agreement, they truly benefited from it. So what kind of process did you have to go through to get that incredible outcome that you are so proud of?
You have to actually start talking to people very early about these things. Sometimes it can take 6 to 7 years to get a community comfortable with accessing their traditional land or any land really. So we started the process extremely early on, basically 2021, 22, and we spent a lot of time in the community getting people comfortable with the concepts and the noise, the sorts of the visual amenity that would occur, but then of course also the benefits that would occur.
What were the benefits?
Well, lots of technological change, community-related jobs that really gave people a 21st century edge. It was and the community really embraced getting those jobs for their younger people. It was a really good process.
The whole territory has been pretty rapt about it, so you're a bit of a champion there. I mean, you may want to consider switching seats because I know the folk at Bowen were a bit down on you, but, that's just the way the party rolls.
I wanted it to be Bowen.
What's that?
I wanted it to be Bowen.
Well, mangoes forever, man. I'm totally with you on that one. So now space travel has traditionally, it's always been a very expensive business. There's so much risk. There's so much material required. Back in the old days, 2021, only astronauts and gazillionaires like our mate Richard could manage to afford it. But the Apollo missions back in the 60s and 70s, the ones that saw us take man to the moon, cost hundreds of billions of dollars and in today's money. And even though there's been advances in technology that have made things cheaper, each space shuttle mission has also still cost about $500 million. It's extremely expensive. Now, Joni, you're now the Chief Technical Officer with a new space startup that's set to take advantage of these cheaper prices. Why was it so expensive to get to space before 2030? What sort of factors made it really costly?
A huge factor early in the space industry was that everything had to be put together by humans.
Right.
Like hands had to touch everything. And then aerospace vehicles are very lightweight and they are built right to the edge. So after the humans put them together, it had to be tested extensively to make sure that they wouldn't fail. Now, in this testing process, you might build 5 units and only one would pass.
Right.
And so that initially drove the development of 3D printing and additive manufacturing techniques drastically brought down the costs of the rocket motor manufacturers themselves. But the next largest cost in space rockets was the tube, right? The large tank that had to hold the propellants. And once we learned how to robotically manufacture them to precisely high quality, and all of them would pass test.
Yeah. And what about, because, we'd always see things like landing in the ocean and basically one life, one use kind of thing. What about recycling? Are they reusing?
Reusability was a key enabler due to really advanced autonomous control systems. So 10 years ago, we were landing the first stage. Now we're reusing the second and the third stages, picking them up, catching them at sea, and refurbing them.
Not being up for that job. Yeah. I think they're pretty hot and fiery when they land. So.
The robots take care of all of it now.
Thank God for robots. Now, Richard, I know, is busting to jump in here.
Yeah, no, I was going to say too, I love the analogy about the old days when things weren't reusable to use, planes, cars, boats, and trains, that when you run out of gas in the gas tank after you've paid for the vehicle, you stop at a gas station, fill it up, and then keep driving or flying. And in the case of rockets, we were throwing almost all that stuff away. Imagine if every time you drove your car that you bought on the lot, you fill it up with gas once, and when it runs out of gas, you crush it and go buy a new one. Well, people wouldn't drive very much either. And
Even rich people like you wouldn't do that?
No. Only like really, ambulances and a few other really essential things might be driven occasionally. But now, with we were just discussing there with the robots and the automated construction and printing, additive manufacturing plus reusability, that's how now today almost anyone that could afford a plane flight across the country can now afford a trip to space. And I was going to make one more comment about that spaceport too, which was, now that we have point-to-point travel across the globe, having that spaceport and the speed of these suborbital space planes now gets us anywhere on Earth in 90 minutes or less, and it puts any of these towns with a spaceport on it right in the center of the world, really. You are now the center of the world.
Nhulunbuy's always been the center of the world, frankly, but I'm glad to see it's getting that recognition. Are you happy with the idea of all these interlopers coming in and using our spaceport, Adam? Is that
Absolutely. Okay? I mean, I think that's one of the enablers that has changed the way we live, is that we can now go to anywhere on the planet in 90 minutes. And, to do that, you basically have to go to space.
You're not talking about 2020, obviously,
no,
but
2030,
you're in 2030.
Yeah, I'm in 2030. So in 2030, you can go anywhere you want on the Earth in 90 minutes, as long as you go from a spaceport to another spaceport.
Well, and which is great because your new venture, Space Hop, is based in Nhulunbuy, and it's really going gangbusters. So Space Hop started off, as you know, offering companies commercial flights to low orbit, so like the kind of Vomit Comet experience. And then they moved on to servicing the old International Space Station. Remember that? These days, of course, it's a space hotel. It's part of the new chain of airless BnBs. And now in 2030, Space Hop offers joy flights around the moon. So it's a pretty exciting time for cashed-up travellers. Space Hop operates out of the thriving Nhulunbuy spaceport, and it's the latest of your space ventures, Adam, with the backing of a couple of dudes, Mike Cannon-Brooks and Dr. Andrew Forrest. So it's a not-so-little Aussie company taking on the world. Billions have been invested. The flights are busy and the company's growing. So that all sounds great, but Adam, Space Hop is yet to actually make a profit, which your old banking mates love having a go at you about. But is making a profit that important, or is it better to sink money into growth and research to stay ahead of your competitors?
I think what you've got to do when you're in frontier technology is you've got to keep developing research and development, keep developing technology. And so what our investors are looking at is the top line of our revenue growth. So we're growing substantially year on year, and our net income is catching up as well. And so there's going to be a point in the near future where, the billions of dollars we make every year is more than the billions we spend, and then we get into a very good position of making net income. So we find it very important to keep focusing on technology and working on what's going beyond going around the moon.
Keeping the dream alive, man. That's what you're all about. Now, Richard, time certainly hasn't dulled the thrill of space for you, and you need never work again, really, let's face it. But you're so excited about what some of these new startup companies are doing that you actually took a gig with Adam's company, Space Hop, as a commercial space pilot. I know NASA wouldn't let you into the program back in the day, but suck on that, NASA. You've got your own gig, flying people all around space. You fly regular people into space for a living. Well, regular rich people. It's about $200,000 a ticket to go 100 kilometres above the Earth, past the Kármán line, and you'll fly them into space proper for $2 million, even more if they want to do a lap around the moon. $2 million. That's enough for a one-bedroom apartment in Outer Rockhampton these days. So these people are very keen to see space. But while that's expensive, you must really love space travel to come out of retirement and, ferry these people around. So, Richard, can you just tell us what is it like to blast off into space? How does it feel? What is it that keeps you going back and doing it over and over again?
Well, first of all, let me just say that as cool and dramatic and amazing as the launch sequence is, the countdown we were discussing earlier, followed by actually a relatively short, powerful acceleration into orbit. It only takes about 8.5 minutes under 3.5 or 4.5 Gs to reach orbit. That's actually less time than it takes to get to altitude on a regular jet plane flight. And then you're free and floating in space, and you are, from an energy standpoint, halfway to anywhere. Meaning, if you want to go to the ISS, if you want to go to the moon, it's a relatively small amount of energy to get to any of these other places. But it does take some extra time. Just to dock with the ISS, it takes hours to a day to dock with the ISS. If we want to go to the moon, it takes us 3 days out and 3 days back to get to the moon and back. But and as expensive as those prices seem now, first of all, there's really a shockingly large pool of people who can afford to pay those prices even now, but the prices continue to come down. And so I think that, if you think about the people that migrated from Europe to other parts of the world, a couple hundred years ago, those people would sell their homes, sell their cars, sell their businesses, load up their kids and their pets and their baggage, and travel to a new world, metaphorically, to build a new life. And the prices already are looking to where it will be less catastrophic to your lifestyle. You'll have to sell off less of your net worth to go now. Pretty soon we'll be able to invite people to come live on the moon and go live on Mars. So that's just right around the corner.
That's Adam. I'm sure he's already ticking over that as his next venture. And not only it's not just tourists you're taking around. NASA and other space agencies are booking flights on some of this because it's cheaper for them than arranging their own flights around the joint. So things are changing quite a lot. And the other thing that's really changing is the number of satellites that's being launched. It's really skyrocketing from around 2,000 satellites back in 2020 to about 50,000 satellites now, 10 years later. Joni, why so many? What are they all for?
Earlier in the decade, there was a proliferation of increasingly small satellites. Now,
CubeSats and that sort of thing.
Every single one of us has our cell phone in our ear, and we used to carry around these terrible glass things that we'd always have a broken face on. And so we've seen how electronics can shrink rapidly, and then this affected the satellite industry in the same way. So what that allowed is increasingly small companies to launch more intelligent and capable satellites into orbit, and combine that with the lowering launch costs, that really, really led to a proliferation of satellites up there.
Well, what problems could this cause?
Well, there's the Kessler effect.
Right.
When all these satellites are whizzing around at 7.3 kilometers per second. So, by the way, 7.3 kilometers per second is pretty fast.
It's ridiculous.
Yes, because you and I are like 5 meters apart. So that means in 1 millisecond, bam. So if these things hit each other on pretty much any vector, there's nothing to describe what occurs. It's like liquid droplets. Even though they're solid when they start, by the time they're done, it's a mist of metal and silicon shrapnel. And so
it's a chain reaction of disaster.
Well, that's the first impact. After that, the shrapnel goes around and then hits another and hits another. Thus far, we've been extremely lucky that early in the decade, the governments of the Earth prevented people from launching satellites without active control systems. So basically, the satellites have to deorbit within a certain amount of time, or they have to be able to dodge. So as long as nothing bad happens, we can maintain our way of life. But
when has anything bad ever happened, here or in space? I think we're fine, Joni.
Not
we made it to 2030. We'll be great. Now, Adam, things are always moving fast in emerging industries, and you're no stranger. Technology, you get a disruptor coming in and messing with the way things are done, and then once that disruptor's established, new disruptors come in, kind of like a series of Russian nesting dolls, but without the smiley, placid faces. It's all, fast and breaking things. So it should come as no surprise to you that a bunch of lower cost operators are now entering your space travel market. UberSpace and Lyft Off hope to be the saviours of their respective parent companies, and they're offering much cheaper rates to go into space. What's the strategy when competitors spring up like this? I do notice you've just started to sweat, but, I'm sure you've got a plan, Adam. What is it?
No, I get asked this all the time, and I think their technology is very shifty. They haven't tested it very well. There's a lot of risk associated with that. So the prices they're charging are not significantly less than ours, and we've got heritage in space. We've gone so many times that people can trust us.
Plus, you serve the hot drinks all the time, irregardless. Yeah. So
special containers.
Yeah, very special containers. Now, the Space Hot board was kind of, inclined to go with you on that, but they were a bit more panicky than you were. So they decided to do a classic 2020 move and pivot. They've decided that Space Hop is going to expand as a company in a brand new direction into space mining. So, Dr. David Flannery, you've been awfully quiet so far. I guess you're pondering the phone call you just had from Space Hop's newly formed mining arm. You're an astrogeologist and they want you on their team. What on earth is there worth mining in space?
Plenty. Perhaps not the moon, actually, though.
Oh.
I might keep my wallet in my pocket for that one, simply because the moon is much more uniform than the Earth or even Mars. There's not a lot on it to mine. Elements and minerals aren't really concentrated to the high degrees they are on Earth.
Right.
So I'd be very cautious investing in a business that claims to mine metals or rare earth elements, for example, on the moon. But there's still lots of science to do in 2030, I think, and more people and robots and science in space will afford some great opportunities.
Well, there are, there are a couple of, like asteroids and stuff have precious metals and Mars and things. So you're saying the moon is really, in terms of metals and stuff, it's a bit of a dud.
It's made mostly of basalt, like volcanic rock.
You're so judgy, you geologists. What do you got against basalt?
It's uniform. And so on Earth, when we mine, what makes an economic deposit on the Earth is what degree are the things you're interested in concentrated. And so if you can mine 100 tons of material for a gram of gold, it's economically viable if you can do that at a low enough cost. Now, the moon's really hard to work on. It's a hard vacuum. You have to get things out of Earth's gravity well over there. You need a really good reason, I think, to mine it. And to bring back precious metals that we have on the Earth already doesn't seem like an economically viable proposition.
I feel like Adam's board might have a decent reason to mine, but we'll come to that in just a moment. Now, Jonathan, obviously, in addition to being the Minister for Space, which you did such a gun job at, that you've got another portfolio, you're also the Minister for Natural Resources, so you know a thing or two about mining. Just so we can get our head around the idea here on Earth, how do companies get the right to mine in Australia? Who owns what and who gets the money from digging it up and selling it? Can I just go out there tomorrow and start digging?
You need to get, the minerals are owned by the state. So each state government owns them, except in the territory, of course, which is where they're Commonwealth owned. And you need to get a permit to mine from the state government. That has an overlay of Commonwealth regulation, particularly for environmental matters. There are matters of national environmental significance that will trigger a Commonwealth intervention. And so getting approvals for a very large mine takes 7 to 10 years.
Oh, my God. What a boring job. But look, obviously it's worth it at the end, getting the sign-off on that sort of thing. So the laws that govern activities on the ground don't apply to what's going on outside of Earth's atmosphere, but the United Nations does have 5 treaties established between 1967 and 1984 that deal with issues beyond our planet. Now, Richard, Australia is still a signatory on all 5 space treaties, but what does this mean practically? What are the rules out there as to who owns what? I mean, you've got a vehicle up there. You've got a bit of a prime viewing spot for it.
I do, but unfortunately, my rover and the territory I claim between my lander and the rover are on that basalt. So, from a mining rights standpoint, that's actually probably not the best territory. But you're right. The law is very interesting. The United Nations even now recognizes mathematically describable spaces at locations in space. So, for example, if you put a geosynchronous satellite up, that's just in orbit around the Earth, but it's a very specific spot that if you want to broadcast a TV signal, you want it to hang over the country as the Earth rotates that you're broadcasting to. And so it's very important to control or own that space. And so starting from there, you can then extrapolate that out to asteroids and even locations on the moon. And so I would simplify it to basically say the United Nations says, if you can describe a place in space mathematically, even if it's not on land, and then you're actually the first one there, and you have it under continuous use as a transmission location or as a mining operation, then the United Nations will grant you sort of first mover rights to control it until you leave it alone or lose control of it.
And very quickly, David?
Just wondering, the moon is probably the ultimate pristine environment and of immense cultural significance to lots of people on the planet. I think it might be difficult to get an agreement in place to, say, strip mine it, which is what we might be needing to do if you want to get to the water.
Well, that's interesting because it's not water that we're actually interested in. Space Hop has got the regulatory approval and they're going to go ahead and mine, but what they're interested in is helium-3 from the lunar surface. So, David, what is helium-3 and how and why can we get it from the moon?
Helium-3 is an isotope of helium. It's on the moon, but it's in extremely low concentrations, actually, like parts per billion.
So how would you get it?
Well, you would have to strip mine massive areas of the moon.
You couldn't just fly over it and heat it up and get the gas coming off?
Unfortunately, not. In any case, it would be a massive endeavour. I think you actually have to process hundreds of tonnes of regolith to get a tiny quantity of it.
Right.
That's going to be a problem.
But it's worth a whole lot of, it's $5,000 a gram for this stuff.
I hate being a sceptic, but again, I got to keep my wallet in my pocket because helium-3 is not used for fusion on Earth at the moment.
Right.
Regular fusion using deuterium is a problem that we don't expect to really have a viable commercial reactor until beyond 2050. Helium-3 fusion is even harder. You need even higher temperatures. And so I'll keep my wallet in my pocket for now.
All right, but luckily you're not an investor, you're on a salary. Our entrepreneur...
I'm going to keep him away from our investors.
No need to have truth entering the discussion in the investment room. Now, Jonathan, if an Australian company was to pull this off and the Space Hop is really keen to get it going, would the government invest in it? Because it seems like a pretty good way, a bit of a cash cow, really.
Well, there's a massive legal stoush going on at the moment about how these treaties work.
In 2030.
In 2030. There's been some limited regulatory approval for certain things, but that's really just, in the sort of context in which Richard was speaking. There is not the kind of wholesale regulatory access to the moon or anywhere else in space while we're arguing about what the common heritage of mankind means as a phrase in the Moon Agreement.
Unfortunately, we all know that when it comes to mining and common heritage of mankind, one side generally tends to win over the other, which is potentially good news for Space Hop, but not necessarily for everyone else. So the Chinese and Indian companies have been targeting helium-3 for years as a way to make green power for their huge populations. So you are actually pretty keen to invest in it. The government invests in it and helps it get a go on as it goes. Now, Richard, you've been asked to pilot this pilot scheme for mining helium-3 on the moon. Are you happy with the idea of shuttling miners to the moon instead of tourists? And
absolutely. Think about it, like the oil derricks that we used to use to mine fossil fuels here on the Earth. Those platforms were extraordinarily expensive. We had the helicopter crews out and back, at a great expense. In fact, it was also a fairly dangerous assignment in the sense of the travel out and back and the storms and collapses, much less the environmental damage. The cost to us here on the Earth was substantial. And yet we did it because we have been so, the amount of energy we need as a civilization is so great. And so if we can mine the surface of the moon to avoid despoiling the Earth or fill that energy gap that is growing constantly here on Earth, I think it's a great use.
Plus,
even if we did solar panels on the moon, there's other things we can do, all large scale, all like mining across that surface that we ought to look at all these things to see how we can help humanity back here on Earth.
Plus, you're so keen to take the job because it means you can keep wearing your very cool jacket every day. Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's what's really driving it there.
That's exactly it.
Now, there are already several companies in advanced stages of developing plans to mine helium-3. So the quickest solution for you, Adam, instead of, starting behind the eight ball, seems to be either collaborate with them or acquire them and put their mining know-how into space-hop rockets. One very advanced and well-credentialed mob, an Australian company named as an homage to the large volcanic plains on the moon, once thought to be actual seas. Adam, are you happy to buy and work with this new company, Lunar Sea?
Yeah, we are very happy to work with them because they've been developing their mining technology on the surface of Earth in Australia for a long time, and they've mastered autonomous mining, so they can coordinate from satellites that orbit above the Earth. That technology was already around in the early 2020s. So we're happy to partner with them, and I think they're happy to work with us because everybody loves space.
Everybody loves space, certainly on this panel. And amazingly, the deal is inked in record time, in less than a year, because you, Adam, bet Elon you could get it done in that time. The first launch is ready to go. So Nhulunbuy is abuzz with excitement. Or is that a Michael Collins with excitement? The prospect of large quantities of helium-3 has spurred on the fusion research, and large-scale reactors have been funded. So, Adam and David, what's needed to mine on the moon? What kind of gear do you need up there? Do you need people? Do you need habitat?
I can imagine if we wanted to have a moon base, which we might need for a variety of reasons, we're going to need to move a lot of material around. We might need to live underground to escape the radiation and to make a more viable moon base. So we'll need that sort of equipment, robotic equipment, I imagine. But I struggle to imagine an economically viable
He's such a Debbie Downer,
commodity.
isn't he, on the whole
I'm not convinced by helium-3 and maybe water for rocket fuel and maybe as a breathable gas, which is present
Have you ever
on
made zillions of dollars as an entrepreneur?
I haven't. Maybe I should be thinking bigger.
I feel like I can see why. Adam, what else is there anything else you feel would be needed to be done on the moon to make your, what do you need up there to make it all
Well, you
real?
need energy.
Yeah.
So energy you can get from solar panels, as Richard was saying, and good battery systems. We've got amazing batteries now in 2030. They're like 10 times better than they were.
They're like 100 times better.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah. And then we have people that operate the control systems. Even though there's autonomous mining, we still need people around to make sure everything's running smoothly, and they need water to drink, they need oxygen to breathe, they need food. So they're growing their food in habitats. And the best thing about the moon is it's got water on the moon, and you can use the water. You can drink the water, you can use electrolysis to split it into hydrogen and oxygen, you can breathe the oxygen, and then you breathe out carbon dioxide, which can help the plants grow, so you can get a bit of an ecosystem going, and then you can also put it as rocket fuel and go back off the surface of the Earth. So it's a reasonably contained ecosystem, the moon.
Yeah, it does sound very contained. Now, Joni, the mining equipment's going to be sent on ahead. So can your rockets land and unload on the moon? Like, do they do it autonomously, or do you need an astronaut?
So
I know you're against people being involved in space, so robots.
a decade ago, we were starting to see the first robots that could walk like humans, robots that walk like dogs, drones that fly around autonomously. We've come so far since then. One of the primary reasons I would have needed a human to go with is to turn a screwdriver, right? Because he has to turn it and identify where the screwdriver head hits.
But you've partnered with IKEA and everything is Allen key now.
Everything is fully standardized, and there are robotic imaging and tracking systems so that we can do almost everything, combined with low latency controls using speed of light. But see, there's a little bit of latency. We can have human operators on the ground in their, moon suits, as it were, having the robot on the moon turn the screwdriver, unpack the crate, do all these extremely complex behaviors that before we needed, these 10 fingers to...
I love that the engineer says 5 fingers.
And I think that that's been the critical enabler, because schlepping all these humans up there and all their water and their food is just such a pain.
Wet biological systems. We are just a drain on everything. Thank God that you got all your gear up there nice and early. It's all sitting there. We're pretty much ready for a soft launch. There's a pilot scale plant sitting there on the moon. Mining has already commenced. So now, Minister, are you going to go to the moon for the soft launch? I mean, high vis with that blackness of space behind it. It seems like a great photo op.
Yeah, it's a great time to announce our moon mining tax. Yeah.
Excellent. And I'm sure, because it's great that everyone can hear what you say in space too, so I'm sure there won't be any problems with that announcement. You might have a little bit of trouble getting that message out through Adam's systems, but, you know, like, go for you, all power, Minister. And, anyway, the high-vis pictures are just going to look great. Now, Richard, is it a good idea to take onlookers, like freeloaders, like the Minister, when it's such a... Sorry, no offence, Minister.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Well, there's no question that, you know, these rockets that Adam has been building for us of late, you know,
I think you'll find Joni was building them. Adam was just like going, here, make money, evil plans.
Sure, yeah, for sure. But the point is, they're incredibly reliable. The price is coming down. Their environmental impacts are also low. There's no reason that any of us shouldn't start planning our trips there for whatever reasons, whether it's work or pleasure, or politics. Let's get up there and let's do it. But by the way, I also want to respond to this mining tax. You know, the interesting thing about that announcement, which I had kind of heard a rumor about before, all that's going to do is drive people like me who really plan to live and work in space indefinitely to secede from, you know, planet Earth. We're going to form our own governments. We're going to keep the profits here on our own planets, our own planetary bodies. And, you know, we're not going to be beholden to any of these people back there on terra firma.
Hey, I've just got a horrible image of an angry mob with a shaman hat, but I'm guessing your group won't be anything like that, Richard.
Nothing like that.
Nothing like that at all. Talk of secession always makes me feel comfortable. Now, perhaps against the wishes of some, everybody ends up on board the rocket for the official mine-opening moon mission. So everything goes as planned. It's beautiful. It was just textbook, great flying, great planning. 380,000 kilometres, you all arrive at the moon and the landing site. But there's one small problem. When you get there, Adam, you notice that not too far from your mine is what looks like another mine under construction. How do you feel about a bit of competition up there?
Not very well. I think that's a problem that we all have to solve because, you know, as the Minister was saying before, when you land on the surface and you operate on the surface, you own the surface. And what I've been thinking about, at least for the last 10 years, is what would happen if the Chinese landed 100 metres away and the Indians landed 100 metres away? You know, how do we all sort that out? So this development you're just talking about is very interesting because that's going to become a real problem if they start creeping over a bit more. I don't think it should be a problem because the moon is so big. Do you know the surface area of the moon is actually greater than the surface area of the Earth if you forget about the water of the land itself. So there's plenty of space. I don't think people have to be greedy.
Oh, people don't have to be greedy. I'm sure that's will happen in space with human beings involved. No, that's great. I love your ideas and attitudes. You're a very altruistic, hopeful kind of guy. So, David, does it matter? You know, you were saying before about the moon, like you're there now. Is there any scientific interest in it for you at all?
Totally. Personally, I'm more interested in Mars.
Yeah, no, you've gone on and on about Mars. Let's focus on the moon.
Okay. So we're about to get rocks back from the moon, and these new rocks from the moon will tell us more about the early history of our solar system than we've known before. For example, when did all the cratering happen? What was the Earth like 4.5 billion years ago? These are still unanswered questions today in 2030, and hopefully we can convince the entrepreneurs and tourists to carry some or perform some science for us.
Great.
I'll bring you some back.
You'll bring a lunar rover fullback as soon as he gets around to that. So the Lunar Sea pilot mine is now officially open. The photos were taken and the cameraman made sure that there was no sign of those other mines in the background there. The high-vis came up a treat, Minister. So processing starts and the first load of helium-3 is ready to ship home. It's been an incredible example of when everything's planned down to the last, it can really work well. Richard's doing his final checks for the flight home and everything is going great guns except David, the company geologist who didn't even really want to go up there but then got so excited when he was there about all the science and what he could find, is struck down with a mystery illness right before Space Hop is due to take off. I'll just be very clear, it's not COVID-19, it's not COVID-25, it's none of the COVIDs, it's a mystery illness here to help us drive the plot further forward. Now, David, you were actually scheduled to stay on for a shift up there, with your great geological background, but you've got to return to Earth for medical treatment because no one thought to bring a doctor up there. But, Joni, there's not enough fuel for every person plus the helium-3 to get back there. So someone has to stay behind. You can't leave the helium-3. David's got to come back. There's plenty of food and water to last till the next shuttle. Who's going to stay behind on the moon for a month?
Definitely not me. And since the helium-3 is worthless, we can leave that there. And I'll come back.
Richard?
How comfortable are the rest of you with the automated controls for takeoff and landing?
I'm super comfortable
nominally
with
the
that.
pilot. So I could stay behind. I'd be happy to stay behind, but that means you guys are going on full automatic.
Joni's super comfortable with it, being the designer. She wrote the code. But how comfortable is everyone else letting the autopilot ride?
Good.
Adam's
No problem.
comfortable with that?
No problem.
I might stay back as well, actually.
Okay, there is only room for one, and it was great that you were all so keen. But Joni, even though you have complete faith in your code, you thought, no, this is your chance to really live your dream ever since you were a young girl and saw The Martian and, that the guy in that film was your absolute hero. And that was, in fact, one of the inspiring factors that got you into space to start with. So you're kind of excited. You stay behind. You watch as everyone else has a great big takeoff. It's a very successful takeoff. And while you're there, you start a diary of your adventures. And in fact, when you do return to Earth a month later, you score a book deal. Pretty soon, your moon-based memoir, The Lunatic, becomes a New York Times bestseller. So it's all ended extremely well for you, Joni. And David, I'm very pleased to report that you made an absolutely 100% full recovery. It turned out you just had a bit of gas from the helium-3 balloons you were playing with at the farewell party. So that was all okay. Richard, you've decided to lease your land on the moon from where your rover's been going around to Adam. Yeah, so for a tidy penny. So you can set your sights on Mars, the next big venture. I might even upgrade that jacket to something a bit more blingy, bit more, yeah, totally. Yeah, all that time in the ISS, I don't think it can be smelling too great. Now, Adam, obviously, as well, you are so gummed at the idea of Mars. I mean, you're an entrepreneur. You don't want to be stuck mining the moon forever. That was so 2030. You're off to Mars and you've got some big ideas. And now that you've got a mate in politics, you feel like you might have the in on a little bit of funding to get there. Jonathan, however, has had a bit of a rethink. You've decided that the busy life of, high-vis photo shoots and, sticking to the party line is not really what it's cut out to be for you. So you leave Parliament, nothing to do with the people of Bowen going, yeah, where's our spaceport? You promised us a spaceport. You leave Parliament and you become a board member for Richard, Adam and anyone else who'll pay your exorbitant fees for your advice on mining, on space, on anything that can go. And there is where we leave 2030 and all of our extremely successful journeyers and travel back in time now to 2021, where we give you a big hands up. Thank you very much for COVID-safe clapping, everybody. Jonathan Fulcher, Joni Sitzma, David Flannery, Richard Garriott and Adam Gilmour. It's fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on the big journey with us. I hope you didn't get any travel sickness. I'm Bernie Hobbs. It's been an absolute joy to bring you The Moon Is Mine, Hypothetical. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Thanks.
It seems an age since I've seen you. Countdown as the weeks trickle into days. I hope that time hasn't changed you.